Brett Winn. When Brett William Winn disappeared in the winter of 1989, he was 24 years old. At the time, he worked as an assistant manager at the nearby grocery Hallett Cove Foodland and was engaged to Carolyn, his longtime girlfriend. In South Australia, the couple resided in the village of Port Noarlunga, which is only 18.5 miles south of Adelaide city centre. On November 16, 1989, at around 8 p.m., Brett entered a white Ford sedan that had come into his driveway. After the car pulled out of the driveway, the two of them left. Carolyn waved him off as she watched, not realizing who the driver was. Brett called Carolyn later that night to let her know he would be returning soon. The 24-year-old never returned that night, so that was the last anyone heard from him. Brett experienced a break-in that same evening at work. The culprits possessed the combination to the safe, had access to the front door via a key, and knew how to turn off the alarm system using an employee PIN code. They took $60,000 from the store by using this. Authorities assumed that Brett was the robber's inside man and that he had fled after stealing the money with his companions because he didn't show up home that evening. The preliminary inquiry into Brett's disappearance is hardly known. The case seemed to have evaporated fast. Things didn't really get going again until 1997, when, in response to a public plea for assistance, police enforcement received a tip from an unidentified source indicating that the 24-year-old hadn't been abducted but had instead been murdered. Because of this, detectives came to the conclusion that Brett was a member of a three-man gang that may have robbed a number of nearby supermarkets in the months before to his disappearance. They informed police that a man named David was involved before hanging up, but they would not disclose detectives any more details or the man's entire name. 2 years later, two males were recognized by law enforcement as potential members of Brett's robbery gang. For legal reasons, the other man's identity has never been made public. However, the first man went by the name David Christopher Cox. Both suspects acknowledged that they knew Brett, but they said that they had no knowledge of his disappearance, that he had been murdered, and that they had nothing to do with the string of robberies that occurred just before the 24-year-old went missing. When authorities were approached again in 2002, a tipster informed them that Brett's body had been moved after it had been initially disposed of approximately an hour away from his home in Cape Jervis by the side of a road. The 24-year-old's body was transferred a few days later to David Cox's residence in Hackham West, which was less than 10 minutes away from Brett's residence. The caller said that they assisted David in moving Kate Jervis's body and that they were a friend of David's. As per the tipster, when they reached David's residence, they found that a grave had been dug beneath the bedroom floorboards. The body was buried after being placed inside a surf bag. Brett's skeleton bones were discovered in a surf bag beneath the bedroom floorboards by investigators who had responded to the tipster's address shortly after they had gotten this contact. The articles concerning his case have not stated the cause of his death. In 2004, 2 years after Brett's death, David Cox faced murder charges. However, David was freed when a jury found him not guilty despite having the anonymous caller's testimony and discovering the body at his former home. His defense said that most prosecution witnesses were unreliable and of low character, pointing out that most of them had significant drug use in 1989 and that some of them had since developed mental health problems. A few years later, David ended his own life. Naomi, Brett's younger sister, believes that justice will ultimately find its way to the other unidentified male who was a member of the heist ring, despite his passing. She said that at first, the family believed Brett had just taken off and would return shortly, saying he just needed some alone time. They were devastated when he didn't. She did, however, tell the Sunday Mail that the finding of his body was helpful. My parents felt a small sense of relief when Brett was discovered. At last, they could lay him to rest and attempt to begin the healing process. For nearly a year following Brett's disappearance, his fiancée Carolyn received weekly food deliveries, which were occasionally paid for by a man she subsequently identified as Cox, according to a Reddit user who also discussed the case. It is said that when she entered into a new relationship, the deliveries stopped. Online rumors suggest that this was done to trick Carolyn into believing Brett was still alive. Though it's unclear exactly what the truth is right now, the case of Brett Winn remains unresolved. If you're fascinated by true crime and enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay updated on all our latest content. Moving on to the next case. Jeanette DePalmer. In Jersey City, New Jersey, on August 3, 1956, Jeanette Christine DePalmer was born. Jeanette appeared to be a typical middle-class girl, if a little bit devout. She was one of Salvador and Florence DePalmer's 5 daughters, and she hailed from a huge Italian family. She had 3 brothers as well. According to some reports, the family's drug problems were resolved when Jeanette and her older sister, Gwendolyn, committed to the Church of God. She was rumored to be planning to attend Bible college and to be actively involved in community activities that assisted drug addicts. Jeanette was regarded as something of a wild youngster by some, while being perceived by others as a girl on the straight and narrow. Some even said that she may not have shared her parents' beliefs or concerns regarding her religious attitude, but rather that it was something they cared about. In August 1972, Jeanette was 16 years old and employed at a clothes store. She told her mother that she was taking the train to a friend's house when she left her home on Springfield Township, New Jersey's Clearview Road on Monday, the 17th. Her parents reported her missing to the local police station after she failed to return home or show up at her friend's residence that evening. On September 19th, 6 weeks later, a decaying corpse was discovered in Springfield's Quarry's Rock Face. The form of the body was found when one of the neighborhood dog Waters pets brought it to its owner. A number of individuals who witnessed the macabre scene stated that odd and potentially esoteric items surrounding the face-down skeleton bones. While witnesses have given varying accounts, the most widely accepted claim is that the body was discovered within a log and branch casket. There were improvised wooden crosses inside this. Some neighbors of Springfield asserted that the body was discovered resting atop a pentagram, around by animal corpses that had been butchered. However, local law enforcement has refuted this assertion. The notion that this murder was connected to witchcraft was strengthened by the fact that the cliff where the body was discovered was nicknamed the Devil's Teeth by the locals for numerous decades. Jeanette's dental records were used to identify the body as hers. The things she was last seen in, the tan pants, navy blouse, and flip-flops, were still on her. Regretfully, the autopsy did not provide the authorities with much information. There are no visible indications of bone fractures, gunshot, or knife wounds on her body or in her clothing, and no drug paraphernalia was discovered on or around the body. The coroner and other officials were unable to provide an explanation for the unusually high levels of lead discovered in the remains. Although the exact cause of death is unknown, the coroner believed the 16-year-old girl had been strangled, which prompted law enforcement to begin a hurried and, to be honest, insufficient homicide investigation. Police were tipped off about a homeless man who lived in the woods close to Gannett's body early on in their investigation into his ruthless murder. Locals called the drifter Red, and they said that after Jeanette vanished, he left his camp in the woods. Though it seemed that this was a tip worth following up on, the prosecutor's office in Union County soon found that Red was unrelated to Jeanette's case. How they arrived at this choice is uncertain. Investigators are still looking into the matter in spite of this setback. Still, it wasn't long until the leads stopped coming in. The fact that none of Jeanette's friends or acquaintances provided reliable information about her lifestyle added to the case's cold case status. Newspapers such as the Star-Ledger and the New York Daily Times started to speculate 2 weeks after Jeanette's body was discovered that she might have been the victim of a cult sacrifice, a practice that might have been carried out by Satanists or a local coven working in the nearby Watchung Reservation, a nature reserve in Union City, New Jersey. Long after Jeanette's case went cold, whispers about the Watchung Reservation and rumors about her death persisted. An anonymous letter about Jeanette's situation started to arrive at Weird NJ magazine in the late 90s and early 2000s. Mark Moran, the editor and co-founder, started looking into the case and recording strange information, such as claims that the Springfield Police Department had misplaced or destroyed the case file. In relation to this, the police department maintained that Hurricane Floyd in 1990 caused flooding, which resulted in the fire. Unknown sources, however, claimed that a copy of the file still existed. Later, Mark Moran collaborated with Jesse Pollock, one of his magazine's correspondents, to create a book about the case. After conducting extensive research, they came to the following conclusions. There was a chance of a cover-up. The case was connected to other unresolved crimes, and there were a number of previously unidentified suspects. No one, not even law enforcement, that the writers contacted for the book was willing to be on record or have their name published, according to an article on the Weird NJ website that covers the case and the book written about it. Locals believed that the murderer was still at large, that the killing was connected to a cult, and that the police were somehow complicit in the crime's cover-up. When Jeanette's clothes was tested in 1973, her blouse, pants, and underwear turned out to be free of poisons or drugs. No extraneous hairs were discovered either. She did, however, have stains in her bra, pants, top, and underwear, but they were too badly deteriorated to be used for blood or semen exams. Donald Schwartz, the initial patrolman who discovered the body, has stated to media outlets that he doesn't believe in the occult hypothesis and that he thinks Jeanette died from a heroin overdose. This belief is also held by several internet detectives, who think the case's supernatural overtones were only a red herring. Instances where there is insufficient evidence to support the claims are frequently attributed to so-called occult practices. However, other people, including Jeanette's nephew, think that someone else caused her death. A Union County judge denied the request in 2019 to analyze Jeanette's clothing for DNA. A veteran private investigator made this request after suing the Union County Prosecutor's Office in an effort to force them to test the garments. The motion was turned down because the private investigator lacked a legal connection to DePalmer, her estate, or any other parties who would be affected by the case's resolution, making it impossible for him to file a lawsuit. Many people hold out hope that someday answers will be provided to a case that remains cloaked in mystery, like the unsolved mystery surrounding Jeanette's case. Moving on to the next case. Beast of Jersey. Jersey Island is a member of the Channel Islands, an archipelago in the English Channel that lies between France and England. There were roughly 57,000 people living on the 9-mile-long and 5-mile-wide island in the 1950s. Residents of the island of Jersey were plagued by a serial rapist from the late 1950s to the early 1970s. During his 14-year reign of terror, he would rape and stalk at least 13 victims, going by the moniker, the Beast of Jersey. When a young woman in the Montelab region was being pulled into a field by a man while she was waiting for a bus in November 1957, the fear started. Before tying a rope around her neck, pulling her up to a nearby field, and raping her, the man with the scarf covering his head struck the woman from behind. He left the woman where she was after he raped her and left the scene. Thankfully, the woman was located and brought to a medical facility. In March 1958, the man attacked once more, this time focusing on a 20-year-old lady who was making her way home from a bus stop on foot. He dragged the woman to a field using the same modus operandi, then raped her after putting a rope around her neck. From 1957 to 1959, he would only prey on ladies who were close to bus stations. He assaulted a 31-year-old in July of 1958 and a 28-year-old in October of the same year. The perpetrator was characterized by all the victims as smelling musty. He increased the stakes in 1960 and started attacking people in their homes through break-ins. The man broke into a residence in St. Saveller on Valentine's Day in 1960. A man wearing a mask was seated in the 12-year-old's bedroom when he woke up. The youngster was led outside to a field by the man, who then sexually molested him while tying a rope around his neck. When a man claiming to be a doctor offered to give her a ride in March 1960 while she was waiting for her bus in St. Brelade, She accepted. The man was on his way to pick up his wife. The man attacked her as soon as she got inside the car, bound her, and blindfolded her. After that, he drove to a field close by and sexually assaulted her. The man led her back to the car, but she was able to get away and discovered a couple who lived close by. The assailant had already left when the police were called. A man broke into a secluded property in St. Martin later that month. A 43-year-old woman heard a noise while she was asleep. After switching on the lights, she downed the stairs to look around. The lights went out suddenly as soon as she got to the bottom of the stairs, and she heard movement in the living room. She attempted contacting the police on the neighboring phone, but the connection was dead. There was a cut in the phone line. Without delay, the man chased after her, threatening to kill her and demanding money. The woman's 14-year-old daughter heard the disturbance and went to investigate. After managing to get out of his grasp, the mother instructed her daughter to shut herself in her room. Running to a nearby farmhouse, the woman set off the alarm. The invader had fled before she got back, but not before raping her daughter. He broke into the bedroom of a 14-year-old girl in April. When the girl awoke, the man in the mask had been observing her while she slept. He fled as the girl cried so loudly. An 8-year-old child would be kidnapped from his house in July and brought to a field where he would be raped. After that, the assailant returned to the boy's house and dropped him off at his door. In 1961, he would attack 3 more youngsters. They were all taken from their houses, brought to a field, and sexually assaulted. After more than 3 years of operation, the police still had no leads or suspects in the Beast of Jersey case. Every man on the island was asked to provide their fingerprints, and they interviewed every man with a criminal record. 13 of them, nevertheless, declined to provide their fingerprints. One of them was, it would turn out, the assailant. The victims had stated that the attacker was approximately 40 years old, 5 feet 6 inches tall, and dressed in a long coat, a scarf, or a mask. Each victim described the attacker as speaking with an odd Irish dialect and having a musty smell to him. He would launch attacks from 3 a.m. until 10 p.m. Using a flashlight, he would sneak into houses through windows. Police soon discovered a break in the case. Alphonse Legator-Lewitt, a local, was taken into custody after being suspected of the rapes and attacks. Further than the fact that he was a well-known eccentric, the police had no further evidence against him. He was a recluse who enjoyed taking walks late at night. He had a raincoat, too. After 14 hours of interrogation, the individual was freed because there was insufficient proof. But the harm was already done. Vigilantes set fire to his home after his face appeared prominently in newspapers. Alphonse had to permanently depart from the island. The police decided to ask Scotland Yard for assistance as they had no leads or suspects. Scotland Yard asked residents to establish neighborhood watches and watch out for one another. After a 2-year hiatus, the Beast of Jersey reappeared in 1963. The Beast would attack once more in April 1963 when he kidnapped a 9-year-old boy and brought him to a field where he was sexually assaulted. He then went on to rape 3 more kids before going missing for 2 years in 1964. 2 years later, an anonymous letter purportedly written by the Beast of Jersey was sent to the police. "Dear Sir, I believe that now is the right time to inform you that you are wasting your time," the letter stated. "Remember, it won't end here. I promise to be fair to you and give you another chance. I've never had much in my life, but right now I want to seize every opportunity. My dream has always been to commit the ideal crime. I had already done this, but since it has to be ideal this time, I let the moon shine exceptionally brightly in September. Not 1, but 2. I enjoy to toy with you people, but I'm by no means a fanatic. Before September, you will hear from me, and I'll give you all the hints you need to try to figure out how to capture me. Sincerely yours, just wait and see." A 15-year-old girl would be kidnapped and sexually assaulted in August. But the crime was different this time. The girl's body was covered in lengthy scratches that were evenly spaced out in parallel rows. After this, there would be no attacks for 4 years. August 1970 would see the beast return. A 14-year-old would be taken from his house and sexually assaulted. The boy reported to the police that the assailant had on a mask. Luckily, the beast would never put on the mask again, and this would be the last attack. An automobile ran a red light directly in front of 2 police officers who were on duty in center on July 10, 1970, at approximately 11:45 p.m. The officers pursued the automobile because it was being driven erratically. After running down the sidewalk and into a tomato field, the driver ran onto the wrong side of the road, sideswiped several vehicles, and eventually struck a hedge. The motorist attempted to run away, but because the officers were European, they rugby tackled him and took him into custody. The police station was where he was brought. They were able to see the man well under the police station's lights and saw that he was not your typical irresponsible driver. The man had been wearing a long dark coat with shoulder pads, cuffs, and collar protruding from it, along with 1-inch long nails and screws. There was a musty smell about the long coat. The man's socks were tucked into his ancient pants. Police discovered 2 lengths of rope, a woolen cap, empty cigarette packages, a roll of adhesive tape, and a flashlight with tape over most of the bulb, creating a regulated, narrow beam of light within his pockets. Police discovered a mask and a spiky black-haired wig inside his car. The man's face bore tape markings identical to the mask's tape, indicating that he had worn it not long ago. Edward Pinnell was recognized as the man. He said he was headed to a sex party and that he had nails through his clothes in case someone there knew martial arts when the cops questioned him. Police discovered an extremely foul-smelling hidden area in his house that was packed with worn-out clothes and homemade wigs. In addition, they discovered a sword, pictures of nearby homes, and an altar full of books about black magic and the occult. In 1925, Edward Pinnell was born. He was incarcerated as a teenager for stealing food to feed families that were going hungry. Other than that, he had no criminal past. He was a construction worker with a spouse and kids. According to his wife Joan, he used to visit her foster home for children disguised as Santa Claus in an attempt to provide festive pleasure. She remembered that the children nicknamed him Uncle Ted. His spouse claimed that she was ignorant of his behavior during their marriage. She added that Pinnell had no desire for sex and that their lives were mostly lived apart. At the time of his arrest, Pinnell was also seeing someone else. Pinnell was tried on November 29, 1971. The jury found him guilty on 13 charges of rape, sexual assault, and sodomy against 6 of his victims in under 48 minutes. He received a 30-year prison sentence. In 1991, Pinnell was granted parole from prison due to his good behavior. In 1994, he went free. Moving on to the next case. Madeleine McCann. After Madeleine vanished 13 years ago, there was truly little chance that her case would ever be resolved. Then, on June 3, 2020, a shocking revelation was made by British and German investigators. In an instant, the case was once again in the news. They declared that a German guy was being looked into for maybe killing Madeleine. At first, they made an effort to conceal the identity of the individual, but it was soon revealed. German media reports identified the suspect as 43-year-old Christian B. From 1995 till 2007, he resided in the Algarve region of Portugal. In Germany, Christian B. is presently serving a term for unrelated offenses. Soon after, more details became available. They displayed the 2 cars he was driving when she vanished. First, a Jaguar sedan and a Volkswagen camper van. They made an appeal for anyone with knowledge to come forward. Sadly, the German police also declared that they now think Madeleine is dead based on the evidence they have. Nonetheless, the British police continue to refer to it as a missing persons case. Her family is still holding out hope for her survival. It was also made known that Christian B.'s cell phone was found quite close to Madeleine's location on the night of her disappearance. Christian B. registered his Jaguar automobile under a different name the following day. Even while it might just be a coincidence, it's still noteworthy. We were able to determine that an hour prior to her disappearance, Christian B. received a call using his cell phone. For 30 minutes, the call went on. You can see the number I called him at as well as his phone number here. When the police first noticed Christian B. asking questions in a chat forum regarding Madeleine's abduction, they began to investigate him. Christian B., who was residing in the Algarve, supported himself by theft. According to German police theory, he may have broken into Madeleine's flat to steal something before deciding to kidnap her. Many people will wonder why it took 13 years for this information to become public. Because Christian B. was investigated once again, the Portuguese police really looked into him back in 2008 years ago. Christian B. was investigated once more. According to what the witness told police, he allegedly told someone at a pub about how he killed Madeleine and buried her somewhere. Christian B. also discussed his role in other incidents. He was found guilty of those crimes and is presently serving a jail sentence. Then it was made public that Christian Brechner is the suspect's full name. In 2007, he relocated to Hanover, Germany, leaving the Algarve region. He lived in his shadow, off the grid. During a recent check of the property, the cops discovered a hidden cellar. We don't yet know what's inside the cellar because it happened only a few days ago, and the police haven't released all the details. However, we are aware that certain samples were brought in for examination. Wolfgang Kossack, a man who briefly lived next door to Christian, recalled that Christian had informed him that no one knew he was residing there and that he had not registered with the authorities. Wolfgang also recalled the Christian's camper van that was parked close to his plot. Christian resided in Braunschweig, around 40 miles from Hanover, from 2013 until 2016. He dug a cellar there, too, neighbors of his claimed. The present owner and his neighbors want it to be searched. She might be lying on top of Madeleine McCann. The current owner worries. Christian has told his lawyer that he will never speak to the police, and he has refused to speak with them. Nonetheless, German prosecutors are positive that they have their man and will work to prove him guilty of the crime. The Portuguese media reports that Christian had a female accomplice who assisted him in identifying the best residences to break into, but no concrete evidence was provided and the story is yet unconfirmed. When he was residing at Praia de Luz, not far from the location where Madeleine was abducted, the authorities think he lived in this house. Moving on to the next case. Marisol Gonzales. Marisol Gonzales, 17, was a resident of Cottonwood, Arizona. She excelled academically at Mingus Union High School, had a large social circle, and a loving, close-knit family. Before entering her junior year, in the summer of 1997, she started dating Cecilio Cruz, a neighbor and classmate. But Marisol ended things with Cecilio when she found out he was seeing someone else. She discovered she was expecting a child shortly after. At approximately 10 p.m. on March 24, 1997, Marisol, who was by this point fully pregnant, got a call. She put on a light jacket, sweatpants, and slippers before leaving her house. This would be her family's final sighting of her. Marisol was reported missing to the police the following morning after her family was unable to locate her in bed. A body would be discovered in an alleyway a block from her home at around 6 in the morning. One shot to the face had wounded her. A man who lived across the street from the alley found her dead. Since he didn't speak English well, he had his son phone the police. It was difficult for the police to gather statements from the possible witnesses during their investigation. Rumors circulated that Cecilio belonged to a gang and might be implicated in drug-related crimes. Investigators believe that Cruz's affiliation with the gang may have intimidated witnesses. During the preliminary investigation, there was also a rumor that Marisol had been slain by a rival gang in retaliation for Cecilio. Cecilio was said to have spread this rumor. Marisol was 9 months and 1 week along with a scheduled delivery date of her son the next day, so it didn't seem like she would have left her house at night without telling anybody where she was going for just anyone. According to police theories, she was there to meet Cecilio. Cecilio would refuse to admit to speaking with Marisol for the entire day when police would ask him again. He claimed that night he was sleeping at home. Cecilio was still a major suspect, but the investigation quickly came to a standstill because there were no fresh leads or possible witnesses. Then, in 2014, the case was chosen for investigation by the Cold Justice Show, a TNT TV program that looks into unsolved homicides. In partnership with the Cold Justice team, Cottonwood Police looked into more than 90 leads related to this case. Prospective witnesses who refrained from making statements in 1997 began to come forward. They spoke with a witness who gave them a possible timeline for Marisol's death. That alleyway was across the street from where she resided. According to reports, she heard a gunshot at around midnight and went outside to look around, but she saw nothing. She did not witness a car speeding off or leaving. This rules out the notion that Marisol was murdered by a member of a rival gang who was seeking revenge. It was really dark when she first saw Marisol's body. They also spoke with the sister of Marisol. She stated that she was on a long-distance call at around 10 o'clock that evening. She handed it to Marisol when she hung up the phone, and she made the decision to call her buddy. The last person to speak with her was this one. The acquaintance was found by the investigators, who then asked her about that particular day. She informed them that day that she was on the phone with Marisol when the latter answered a call from Cecilio, telling her to hang up and they would talk later. The fact that Cecilio had lied to the investigators about not spoken with Marisol that day was demonstrated by this statement. Cecilio was their main suspect, but there was never sufficient proof to bring charges against him. When investigators arrived at Cecilio's workplace to speak with him, he would not answer questions in the absence of a lawyer. Investigators also discovered that, at the time of Marisol's death, Cecilio's other girlfriend was also expecting a child. Actually, Marisol had run across the other woman in the waiting area while attending a visit with her OBGYN. Because Cecilio was just 17 years old at the time and couldn't handle the burden of financially supporting 2 families, the police argue that Cecilio killed Marisol. The district attorney's office in Cottonwood reviewed the police findings and decided to send the case to a grand jury in order to get a murder indictment against Cecilia Cruz. Cecilia Cruz faced charges of manslaughter and second-degree murder in 2014. However, since 2014, there have been several delays in the case as 2 teams of public defenders have withdrawn, citing moral disagreements. Cecilia Cruz's new trial is scheduled to start on January 8, 2020. Moving on to the next case. Mary Virginia Carpenter. Mary Virginia Carpenter, at 21 years old, boarded a train on June 1, 1948, and left her Texarkana, Texas, home to travel 6 hours to the city of Denton. Virginia had a black hat box, a matching makeup case, and a brown steamer trunk with her. She met Marjorie Webster, a fellow Texarkana native, on the train while she was traveling to Texas State College for Women, or Texas Women's University, as it is now known. The two struck up a conversation as this was also Virginia's goal. Virginia had studied journalism at the University of Arkansas before deciding to switch to science studies in order to pursue her dream of working as a lab technician. She had initially registered at TSCW for the 1945 to 1946 academic year, but she had to leave to care for her ailing mother. Virginia was the only kid left to take care of her mother when her father passed away when she was only 15. However, one benefit of staying at home was that she was able to save more money for her studies. Virginia attended Texarkana Junior College for a period before deciding to enroll at TSCW for the summer term of 1948. In the fall, she intends to start her training as a lab technician. Virginia and Marjorie decided to ride together in the taxi to campus at the station. By the time they got there, though, the 21-year-old remembered she hadn't checked on her bags, so she asked Edgar Ray Jack Zachary, the cab driver, how much it would cost to travel back to the train station. When Marjorie asked Virginia whether she wanted to travel back with her, she replied, "No, I'll go alone. I'll be okay." Consequently, the two split off, with Virginia making her way back to the station. It was at this point that she realized her luggage was still missing. She was informed by a station worker that her trunk would not be arriving for a while, and so the taxi driver promised to come get it for her in the morning. Jack Zachary. Virginia consented to give him her station. It was when Virginia got at the university's Brackenridge Hall. It was about 9:30 p.m. Zachary, who was 20 years old, reportedly told the police that he got out of the taxi and went up to two men who were waiting outside a convertible car that was either yellow or cream in color. Zachary stated that one of the men was tall and the other was chubby, and the car was maybe a Pontiac. Virginia supposedly seemed to know them. "What are you doing here?" she asked them as she approached, as though it astonished her to find them there. Zachary departed as they started conversing. He picked up Virginia's steamer trunk and placed it on the building's front lawn the next morning. Although he maintained that she had instructed him to leave it there the previous evening, the university's dean of women pointed out that it was quite uncommon for a student's luggage to be left on the lawn as opposed to being delivered to their door. Before staff members ultimately took the trunk in, it was left out on the grass for 2 days. In the meantime, Kenny Branham, Virginia's boyfriend, called her mother to inform her that he hadn't spoken to the 21-year-old in 3 days. This was not like the usual. When her mother Hazel got in touch with the college, she found out that Virginia hadn't enrolled. She immediately started calling her friends and relatives to see if anyone had seen her. When they hadn't, Hazel filed a missing persons report and the search got underway. When detectives followed Virginia's last known movements, they encountered Jack Zachary, a cab driver, who provided them with information regarding the vehicle's color, yellow or cream. A young man whose girlfriend was a TSCW student was identified as the owner of this vehicle. The two males were allegedly saw by the couple strolling about the car, but they were not observed conversing with Virginia. It was determined that neither the young man nor his girlfriend had anything to do with the 21-year-old's disappearance. A gas station attendant in the Texas city of Aubrey believed he saw Virginia in a yellow convertible 2 days after she vanished. A young woman and 2 men were with her. Then on June 11th, at a bus stop in DeQueen, Arkansas, a ticket agent noticed a young woman who looked like Virginia. She appeared anxious as she waited at the station, apparently chewing her lip and peering out the doors after getting off a bus from Texarkana. Afterwards, she departed with an older male who appeared to be in his mid-20s. The agent got a call shortly after this sighting from a woman inquiring as to whether Miss Virginia Carpenter was present. But all of this went unnoticed by the agent until the next day, when she noticed in the local media that Virginia had vanished. After identifying the 21-year-old from a photo and calling the police right away, she later questioned whether or not she had accurately recognized the young woman. Additionally, at Cerro Negro, Texas, a woman who appeared to be Virginia was observed. Many more sightings of Virginia have been reported across the nation. Not one of them, not even the ones that were just named, has ever been verified. Investigators pondered whether Virginia had ran off with another lover, and a number of Virginia's previous partners conjectured that this was likely the case because they saw how readily she fell in love. Nonetheless, her family thought the 21-year-old wouldn't walk away silently. Prior to her disappearance, Virginia was engaged, but she ended the relationship a few weeks before the wedding. Kenny Branham, her boyfriend at the moment, cleared a polygraph exam. Law enforcement disqualified him from the probe due to this and his lack of motivation. A vast search was conducted for Virginia, looking into wooded areas, creeks, storm drains, and abandoned wells. Authorities used both boats and airplanes, but they were never able to locate any evidence of Virginia. Her handbag has never been found, and her trunk held no information on her whereabouts. Since they were unable to identify a motive for Virginia's escape, law enforcement did not think that she fled on her own. She didn't owe anyone money, had no criminal record, and no envious ex-boyfriends or lovers to flee with. Additionally, she was not pregnant based on the results of her most recent medical examination, which was conducted not long before she vanished. A 3-by-1 wooden box was discovered in a smokehouse close to an abandoned farmhouse on October 18, 1959, approximately 7.5 miles northeast of Jefferson, Texas. There were human remains within, in particular, a woman's skeletal remains. The teeth did not match those of the 21-year-old, despite the fact that it was established that the bones belonged to a Caucasian girl with a shorter leg, which Virginia had. Virginia's taxi driver on the day she vanished, Jack Zachary, is still being investigated as a possible suspect. He was known for being violent and physically abusive, and he had a history of minor infractions. In 1957, he was also accused of attempting to rape a woman, but the victim requested that the police not pursue charges against him. Therefore, the allegations were dismissed. Even though Zachary's wife provided an alibi for him that night, saying he was with her starting at 10 p.m., she ultimately came out 10 years later and denied having given it to him. He acknowledged that he hadn't really been home until 2 or 3 in the morning, but she still maintained that he had been abusive to her and had made her make up an alibi. Zachary was never ruled out in connection with Virginia's case, despite the fact that he was questioned multiple times and passed 2 polygraph exams. 1984 saw his death. He was not connected to the disappearance by any hard evidence. There is a theory that Virginia was the victim of the Texarkana Phantom Killer, the same person who killed 5 young people in Texarkana and its environs in 1946, largely in lovers' lanes, during the Moonlight Killings. 3 of the victims knew Virginia, and the perpetrator has never been found or identified. But there's no proof that she ended up being one of the Phantom Killer's victims. A man came forward in 1998, telling authorities that he thought Virginia was killed and raped by 2 men soon after she vanished. He claimed that her body had been interred at a stock tank close to the university's campus in the dam. There were no remains or other pieces of evidence found when the dam was searched. By this point, both of the men who were identified as the culprits had passed away and were never made public. On June 1, 1948, at roughly 9:30 p.m., Mary Virginia Carpenter, then 21 years old, was last seen outside Brackenridge Hall at the Texas State College for Women in Denton. She is described as a 5'3", 120-pound white woman with brown hair and brown eyes. She limps from a past bone infection in her right hip and has an appendectomy scar on her abdomen. When May vanished, she was recuperating from a bad bout of sunburn, and she went by the moniker Jimmy. Her final known appearance was in a white dress with stripes of brown, red, and green, with silver buttons running down the front, a white straw hat with a flipped-up brim and a feather at the back, red leather platform shoes with a high heel, and a gold watch. She had a crimson purse on her person as well. Virginia will be 94 years old if she survives. Moving on to the next case. Mateusz Kowiecki. Mateusz Kowiecki, originally from Chutkov, a small hamlet in southeast Poland, had worked as a construction worker in Hanover, Germany for the previous 5 years of his life. He had been living with his father, who worked in the city as well, and had been in a long-distance relationship with his Polish fiancée before she became pregnant. On March 28, 2018, at approximately 11:30 p.m., Mateusz, 30, drove out in his 1998 BMW 525 with the goal of visiting his fiancée in Lipiagora, northwest Poland, as she was about to give birth. Mateusz was supposed to show up at his fiancée's house the next morning around 8 or 9 o'clock. There were about 402 miles of driving between Hanover and Lipiagora. Mateusz got a phone call from his father at 10:30 on March 29th. The 30-year-old explained that he had experienced heavy traffic and that a traffic accident had delayed him for 2 hours. He continued by saying that he was currently at the Polish-German border town of Zuskin and that he still had roughly 133 miles to travel. Mateusz texted his fiancée after he hung up to let her know he would be in for approximately 2 hours, but he never showed up at her house and was never heard from again. That evening, at about 5 o'clock in the evening, the 30-year-old's worried fiancée called his sister, who also lived in Hanover but couldn't get through to him. Mateusz's mother, who resided in Poland, then reported him missing to the police out of fear for his safety. However, the officers she spoke with advised her against it, saying they thought he would return shortly. However, the family was able to submit missing persons reports in Germany and Poland after a brief waiting period, and the inquiry got underway. German police dismissed the investigation right away, claiming that Polish detectives were in charge of it. However, this ultimately resulted in a slowdown of the investigation when Mateusz's family asked authorities to find his phone, only to be informed by Polish police that the 30-year-old's German SIM card prevented them from doing so. He vanished in Poland, according to German law enforcement, which further undermined their ability to complete this duty. Mateusz's father's account of his phone conversation with the 30-year-old was called into doubt shortly after detectives discovered that Mateusz's phone had never connected to a Polish network. This was finally explained, though, and it seems that Mateusz and his father did speak briefly over the phone on March 29th. Mateusz's family decided to start their own investigation into his disappearance because they were frustrated with the red tape that seemed to be impeding the probe. They conducted a street search, contacted nearby business owners for CCTV, and went around the community putting up the photo of their missing loved one and pleading with witnesses to come forward. Eventually, they turned up on TV, complaining about the police's lack of attention, communication, and advancement. Mateusz's family didn't know what had happened to him for 6 months. Then, on September 12th, his mother's neighbor came over to talk to her about her barn, noticing that there was a terrible stink coming from it. It was said that the odor has been present since July. Although Mateusz's mother couldn't find it, she thought it was a dead animal. The neighbor then volunteered to search for the monster by going up to the barn's attic area. She concurred. The neighbor discovered a stack of clothes and other stuff, including a rucksack, up in the attic. But when he looked more closely, he was shocked to see that he had discovered a body. He saw 2 nooses hanging from the roof when he looked up. The body had begun to decay quickly due to the summer's heat. Because of this, the head was separated from the body and was in such a bad condition that it was impossible to identify the corpse by sight alone. But Mateusz's backpack was positively confirmed as being on the floor. It was only logical for law enforcement to deduce that the body belonged to the 30-year-old who went missing. A later definitive identification of the cadaver as Mateusz was made. Authorities declared Mateusz's death to be a suicide shortly after the body was discovered and returned his possessions to his family. Interestingly, his fiancée's house was the other way around from his mother's. Mateusz's detached foot was discovered by his family 4 days later, still within his shoe, demonstrating how hurried and careless the investigation had been. It's also unclear why his missing foot wasn't mentioned during the autopsy. According to reports, it would have taken too much time for police authorities to check the barn extensively at the time the body was discovered. A further intriguing piece of evidence is that Mateusz's teeth were knocked out and some of them were blood-stained on his clothes when he was discovered. There were also bloodstains on his clothes, and an orange juice box and a Polish water bottle filled with cigarette butts were inside his backpack. Mateusz, meanwhile, wasn't a fan of orange juice. His car keys were not found with his wallet, despite the fact that these goods were discharged without analysis. In the years since his passing, his car has never been located, and its registration has never been picked up. His phone, which had one call to his uncle on March 30th, was also discovered with the body. But since it terminated within a few seconds and didn't have time to connect, it's thought to have been an inadvertent call. The call never reached his uncle. According to one prosecutor, detectives discovered multiple Polish public transportation tickets that were dated after the day he was thought to have died. Mateusz family stated that they utilized the barn all summer long and didn't detect the body, despite the fact that the attic was essentially visible from the ground floor. Since Mateusz's body was discovered, his sister has charged the Polish police with being careless. Following their punishment for misconduct, 2 policemen have received no further discipline. German officials have also analyzed Mateusz's phone, looked through security CCTV footage, and investigated his Hanover apartments, where they found his tablet. Authorities discovered that Mateusz had lied to his family on March 28th and 29th thanks to this evidence. He wasn't in his car and wasn't even close to where he claimed to be when he told his father where he was. Clutched receipts from his backpack revealed he was, in fact, still in Germany at the time. The 30-year-old traveled by train to Frankfurt an der Oder, a German border town, on March 28th. From there, it is assumed that he walked to Słowbis, a Polish town. It had been almost a day since he had informed his family that he was already in Poland. He and another individual checked into a motel in Słowbis. It's unknown if this individual has been located and questioned. Mateusz took the train to Warsaw the next day, and from there the bus to Zamość, which was near his hamlet. He reached Zamość at midnight. However, it's unclear how he got back. Mateusz's automobile has still not been found as of 2021. He never deregistered the car or transferred ownership, according to the records. Furthermore, toxicological testing has never been performed on his body, and it's still unknown when exactly he passed away. Even though investigators determined that Mateusz committed himself, there are still a lot of unanswered mysteries regarding his case. What was the reason for his tooth loss? His automobile is where? Why did 2 nooses exist? He didn't drink the orange juice, so why did he have a bottle of it? Why had he gone to the hotel, and with whom? How in the world did his family miss his body in the attic? And why did they not look into the stench more thoroughly? We don't know if we will ever find the answers at this stage. Moving on to the next case. The Thompson family. In 1996, 40-year-old Everett Arthur Thompson was regarded as a philanthropic, devoted, and diligent spouse and parent. He was born in March 1956 to Herman and Erlene Thompson in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was the second oldest of 6 children. He was a gifted trombone player in the Hampton Institute School Band in high school and an athlete. After that, he relocated to Chicago, where he met Lydia White while working for a company that manufactured steel. After being married in 1982, the pair stayed in the Chicago region. Everett Jr., age 11, and Andrew, age 8, were their 2 children. In the end, Everett Sr. quit his work to follow his dreams of becoming a restaurant owner and opened Eat & Company on Chicago's Lawrence Avenue and 71st Street. The Eat represented his name. The family was well established in their residence in the 8100 block of South Rhodes Avenue, and their peaceful, friendly demeanor was well known to the neighbors. They also tended to keep to themselves. However, things changed when Lydia's brother Kenneth moved in with them in February 1996. He had just served his sentence for sexual assault and was out of prison. It was known that he had a lengthy criminal past, including 2 burglary convictions and 4 sexual assault convictions. Living with her father was not ideal, but Lydia did have a place to call home. The property had been bequeathed equally to Lydia, her brother, and Phyllis, the pair's New Mexico residing sister. She was therefore unable to just throw Kenneth out of the house. Kenneth was by all accounts unwelcome by the Thompson family, a belligerent and abrasive man who had only caused trouble since arriving. Everett's brother-in-law was characterized by his family as a freeloading house guest. Lydia dialed 911 on July 3, 1996, after Kenneth had threatened to kill her with an axe. Lieutenant Robert Harsheimer of the Chicago Police Department stated that when law enforcement officials reached the area to defuse the situation, they discovered it was peaceful and quiet. According to Harsheimer, there was no continuous issue. Nothing very noteworthy. The quiet prevented the police from making any arrests. Then, on July 5th, 2 days later, Herman Thompson contacted his son when he was at the restaurant. The two spoke briefly before Lydia called Everett. She desperately pleaded with her husband to return home, saying that she had locked herself in the bedroom and that Kenneth had followed her throughout the house with an axe. In order to go home, Everett quickly told his father about the phone call and hung up. It was at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when one of his staff members noticed him leave the restaurant. Everett and the other Thompson family members were never seen again after that. 2 hours later, Kenneth came into the restaurant to inform a manager that Everett had been taken into custody after a vehicle accident. Without providing any further details, he departed once more and got into Everett's van. Just before Kenneth left, the manager saw that his white trainers had crimson streaks on them. After not hearing from the family since July 5th, 12 days later on July 17th, Everett's parents, who were still living in Philadelphia, requested that the Chicago police do a welfare check on them. Officers searched the family's residence but were unable to locate the Thompsons. Kenneth was the one who responded. The family had moved to Philadelphia. He informed the cops. It's puzzling that detectives didn't probe this further, given that Everett's parents, who live in Philadelphia, were the ones who first got in touch with them. Officers didn't look into it further because they believed the Thompsons had taken the family vehicle on their trip because it was also missing. They believed that there was no proof of foul play at this time. Kenneth provided several different versions of the family's whereabouts throughout the course of the following few weeks. He mentioned that they had traveled to Philadelphia by bus, that they had traveled by bus to Minneapolis, or that they had traveled to Hawaii. Even though he didn't bother to verify his account, law enforcement did not intervene. Kenneth was ultimately taken into custody while operating the Thompson family van. Because he had forged Lydia's signature on a check, he was caught. Officers failed to draw the connection between Kenneth's driving the van and his prior assertion that family members had used the vehicle to travel to Philadelphia. He was therefore never questioned again at this time, and the van was never examined or searched. Everett's parents, fed up with the police's lack of interest in the matter, traveled to Chicago in search of clarification. They looked into the disappearance on their own and talked to Eat and Company staff members, but they were unable to uncover any fresh information. When they were unable to find anything useful, they went back to the police and asked them to look into the matter. At that point, the manager of the restaurant where Kenneth had spoken on July 5th disclosed their brief conversation to the police. However, Everett's arrest or involvement in an accident that day were not documented by the detectives. After investigating the case further, police found that Kenneth had faked the signatures of both of his sisters in order to sell their father's property after the Thompsons vanished. A estate inspector who had seen the house just before it was sold noted that the kitchen floor had been totally torn out and that one bathroom bathtub and toilet had been painted crimson. Officers who had reacted to Lydia's 911 call on July 3rd had inspected the property at the time and noted the kitchen floor was intact, and there were no red bathroom fixtures, leading them to assume that these changes had been made after the family vanished. But the new owners had already moved in and started destroying the house for remodeling when law enforcement discovered that it was illegal. Kenneth was interviewed multiple times throughout the course of the ensuing weeks and months, but the police never had sufficient evidence to make an arrest. He relocated to a caravan in Gary, Indiana, not long after his father's house was sold. About a year after the family had disappeared, in July 1997, Kenneth's caravan was investigated by the FBI. They discovered a pair of men's tennis sneakers inside. One of the children's socks was under the crawl area. Test results indicated that the blood on both was human after it was dyed. Additionally, it was found that Kenneth had sold the van belonging to the Thompson family to a salvage yard, and that the van had been compacted, erasing any possible evidence. November 1997, a few months later, saw Kenneth's arrest for not registering as a sex offender. After being freed, he was detained once more for bank fraud the next month. He had written a check for more than $13,000 under Lydia's name. Assistant U.S. Attorney Jacqueline Ross, the prosecution, stated that Kenneth had killed the Thompson family with an axe at the court hearing regarding his fraud charges. The surrounding circumstances offer compelling evidence, she added. The accused person killed his sister, her spouse, and their 2 kids. The government maintains that although bank fraud is the offense, The murders were committed in furtherance of that crime. The prosecution and investigators have proposed the notion that Lydia and Kenneth's father's property became available to them during Kenneth's prison sentence. His sister and her family had already moved in by the time he was freed. Kenneth made the decision to kill the family in order to obtain what he wanted, maybe because he was angry about having to share the house, or maybe he was just interested in the money he could make from selling it. Kenneth committed suicide on December 25, 1997, at 4 in the morning, while confined to his jail cell in the Federal Metropolitan Correctional Center in Chicago, using a bedsheet. He didn't leave any instructions or clues that could point detectives in the direction of the Thompson family's remains. Although the family was killed between July 5 and July 6, 1996, according to law enforcement, there was never enough evidence to prosecute Kenneth White. Regretfully, if authorities had taken action sooner, there may have been evidence. The investigation might have been hampered by the fact that it took 12 days before they were ever reported missing. There was no indication of human remains in either Kenneth's caravan or the family house. There is still no explanation for the Thompson family's disappearance. Thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed exploring these intriguing cold cases with us. If you found the video fascinating, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Cold Case Mystique for more deep dives into unsolved mysteries. Your support helps us bring you more compelling content. Leave a comment below with your thoughts or any cases you'd like us to cover next. See you in the next video, and remember, the search for truth never stops.